Shalom, and welcome to our second week of Old Testament. What I would like to do for this week's video session is in two sessions go over with you the very beginning of the book of Leviticus. If ever someone's going to get stumped or caught up or trapped in their Bible reading, if they're trying to read through the Bible in a year or however long, usually when they get to the book of Leviticus, it is met with much groaning and moaning. So my recommendation is that you have your Bible close by, and I've already put the PowerPoints up on Populi for you under lessons. So if you found this, you can find your PowerPoints. But have your PowerPoints close by because I'll be covering a lot of material very quickly. It was Norman Geisler, a really well-known Old Testament scholar, who noted that Leviticus naturally falls into two sections. The first section is chapters 1 through 10, which is the way to the Holy One. And the way to the Holy One is through the sacrificial system and through the priesthood. The second portion of Leviticus is chapters 11 through 27, which is the way to holiness, which is sanitation and sanctification. Exodus ended with an emphasis on where God was to be worshipped. Leviticus opens up and introduces us to how God is to be worshipped. The Hebrew title for Leviticus is not Leviticus. As a matter of fact, the book of Leviticus has very little to do with the Levites at all. But the Hebrew title is Wa'akara, and he, referring to the Lord, and he called. The title rightly spotlights God's authority and his initiative in issuing rules for acceptable worship. Now, the first thing that we're encountering is the duties of the priest. What is the responsibility of the priest, those individuals that were a part of the Levitical priesthood? Well, they were to be in charge of the rituals, and this meant the sacrifices, the holy days. They were to consult God and transmit his oracles or his rules, regulations, his words to the people. They were to instruct the people in the law. It was not sufficient for the priests just to give the law to the people. They had to explain and tell the people how the law was to be worked out in their everyday practical lives. Also, the priest was to exercise judicial responsibility and to serve as a guardian of the sanctuary. When the book of Leviticus opens, the people are still camped out at the base of the mountain of God at Mount Sinai. Now, the book of Leviticus has great value to us as Christians because it helps us to understand our own religious institution. Understanding the tabernacle is very much understanding the church, the building, the concept of a geographical location and a building that's dedicated and given over to the worship of God. The ritual is very much like our service, and it doesn't matter what denomination you are, whether you're a part of the liturgical church like Anglican or part of an independent charismatic church. We all have our ritual. Even if it's not written down, and there isn't anything wrong with ritual. Then the priesthood reminds us of the role of our pastor or priest. It teaches us the value of ritual. There are two things that ritual accomplishes. Number one, it gives each worshiper a sense of participation. Perhaps you sense this during communion or responsive readings, or even in watching someone be baptized. So anytime there's a ritual within the church, it gives us a sense of participation. Second, it brings about a sense of unity among the people when we are all participating: communion, baptism, responsive reading, corporate prayer. It gives us a sense of unity with one another. Also, any part of Israel's history is instructive to us. It reminds us of the necessity of a separated life. There are two major religious ideas that are emphasized in the book of Leviticus. One is the holiness of God and his demand that, not suggestion, his demand that his people be holy. And two, the importance of the presence of God. It gives us a better, by reading and understanding the book of Leviticus, it gives us a much deeper, richer understanding of the New Testament, and ultimately an understanding of Christ and what his sacrifice meant for us. The main purpose of the book of Leviticus is to show the people how to live their daily lives, not how to live on just those exceptional days or just on those moments that's appointed by the church calendar as a time of celebration, but how to live your everyday Monday through Saturday life. And I think we really all kind of need a refresher on that. The first 7 chapters are the laws of sacrifice, and it breaks down the 5 major sacrifices and how they are to be implemented. Then chapters 8 and 10, the inauguration of worship. 11 through 16, the laws of purification. 17 through 26, the laws of holiness. And then chapter 27, the law concerning vows and tithing. Now, it's interesting, it's always interesting to me, why sacrifice? Of all the things that could be used in order for humanity to get to God, why sacrifice? Even before the institution of the Mosaic Law, which is what we're reading here in Leviticus, even before the institution of this law and the regulations for sacrifice, we find all the way back at the very beginning in the book of Genesis, we find Cain and Abel making sacrifices to God. We find Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. We find Job all making sacrifices to God in order to get to him and to be right with him. There is something genetically programmed into the human persona that says, in order for me to get to God, I have to come with something. I have to make a sacrifice. If I'm going to be in a right relationship with him, a sacrifice is going to be involved. Unique to Christianity, there are many. Let me go over these motives for sacrifice. And I find that even within Christianity, while we might never confess it with our mouths, I find that we have all sorts of motives for the sacrifices, especially the financial and maybe even the time sacrifices that we make. Some people think that by sacrificing, they're going to appease the wrath of the god. We see this in ancient Egypt, where a young woman would be thrown into the flooded Nile in hopes that the god of the Nile would be appeased and his wrath would subside and that the floodwaters would begin to subside. I find that people in Christianity feel like they need to pay God off in order for him to not be mad at them any longer. While this is not an acceptable reason to offer a sacrifice on our part in today's culture, I definitely still see, even within Christianity, people trying to appease God by some sort of sacrifice to control the God. This, I think, is just sheer manipulation. If you do this, then God will do that. If you give $10, then God will give you $100. If you go here and do this, then God will do this and do that. And the whole motivation for giving, going, and doing is to get God to give you something back. And I don't know about you, but I don't think it works. And God can't be manipulated, and he certainly can't be controlled. To assure the continuation of a blessing, if someone's business is being blessed, if someone's crops or family is being blessed, an offering is often a natural response to God. Thank you for what you've done. Keep doing what you're doing. To express gratitude, which is very closely connected with the previous one. To bring about fellowship with God. This is unique to Christianity and to Judaism. In all other religious systems, both ancient and modern, sacrifice is made to get to God, to get something out of God. But only in Judaism and Christianity is sacrifice made in order to ensure and to establish relationship with God. And ultimately unique to Christianity. In all other religious systems except for Christianity, the worshiper sacrifices to get to God. But in Christianity, through Jesus Christ, God has sacrificed to get to humanity. And that's, if you get nothing else from the book of Leviticus, if you get nothing else from this lecture, that is one of the most powerful statements. In all other religious systems, humanity must sacrifice in order to get to the object of their worship. But in Christianity, it is God sacrificing his own son to get to the object of his affection, which would be us. Very little about the Levites are given in the book of Leviticus. There's one little blurb in chapter 25, verses 32 and 33. The Hebrew title, Wa'akara, and he called, more correctly emphasizes the content of the book. Leviticus is not an instruction manual for the professionals because the majority of the content of Leviticus is directed to the everyday, ordinary followers of the Lord God. There are two significant ideas that are presented in the book: the holiness of God and his demand that his people be holy. Of all the usages of the word holy, kadosh, in the entire Old Testament, 20% of all those usages are found solely in the book of Leviticus. That is huge. Out of all the books, Leviticus gets 20% of them. Another significant idea is the presence of God. So holiness and presence are the two main ideas in the book of Leviticus. And I do not believe that those two ideas are exclusive of each other. I believe that anyone who wants to experience and live in the presence of God must also be aware of and a part of and practicing holiness themselves. The main purpose for the book of Leviticus is to show the chosen people of Yahweh how to live their everyday lives. Leviticus is describing a holiness that applies to all the congregation. As I've already said, Exodus ended with where God was to be worshipped. Leviticus introduces us to how God is to be worshipped. Offerings and sacrifice is one of the ways that we are to worship God, because the offerings and the sacrifices reveal our walk toward Yahweh, which is going to be sacrifice and cleansing or sanitation. The feast or the festivals, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Passover, Pentecost, all these feasts are going to reveal our walk with Yahweh, which is a walk of separation. And why the detail of Leviticus? I mean, they go into such tiny minutia. Well, the holiness of God demands sacrifice. The majesty of God requires specific regulations. The honor of God necessitates a code of conduct. The perfection of our God expects the best of its kind, and the purity of God deserves freedom from blemish. In the ancient Hebrew mind, worship without sacrifice was inconceivable. Wherever sin had driven a wedge between God and the worshiper, both sacrifice, that's the outer act, and penitence, that's the inner heart attitude, became incumbent upon the sinner. But not all sacrifices were connected to sin. The sacrifices that are listed in Leviticus 1 through 7 are not exhaustive. For instance, there's no mention of the drink offering or the incense offering. The 5 sacrifices that are given to us in the book of Leviticus 1 through 7, it emphasizes the private versus the public sacrifices or offerings. The sacrifices which would have been offered most repeatedly by the common Israelite are the sacrifices that we find in Leviticus chapters 1 through 7. I'm going to stop there, and I'll be right back with part 2.